So I'm really pleased to introduce today's speakers, who are Mark and Anthony from the UK Health Security Agency. They're going to be talking to us about the public health risks posed by vector-borne diseases, which is steadily increasing. Effective surveillance of ticks and mosquitoes, along with the pathogens they carry, is essential for reducing the risk and protecting public health. A detailed understanding of their ecology and patterns of spread is critical for understanding the emerging threats associated with the changing climate. So without any further ado, I will hand over to today's speakers. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for having us. My name's Mark, my colleague Anthony here. So today, as mentioned, we're going to be talking about the tick and mosquito surveillance and research done by the Medical Entomology and Zoonoses Ecology group that we're part of at the UK Health Security Agency. So public health is something that's sometimes not thought of in the same way as sort of mainstream health. So public health is the science and art in many ways of preventing disease, prolonging life and promoting health through organized efforts in society. So this is prevention. If we can reduce incidence of ill health, we support people, protect people from infectious diseases and give emergency response, and also promoting health education and commissioning to meet the health needs of the members of the public. Medical entomology is a branch of entomology that typically deals with vectors and vector-borne diseases. So these are diseases caused by bacteria, viruses, and parasites transmitted by blood-feeding arthropods. So there are a number of these, but the main ones that we deal with here are ticks and mosquitoes. And through efforts, we have the potential to interrupt transmission cycles between vectors, pathogens, and humans, and that's a lot of what medical entomology is involved in. So vector-borne diseases, as I mentioned, come from a number of different vectors, but the main ones we work on are ticks and mosquitoes. Here's a few different examples of mosquitoes and ticks that transmit different diseases. A lot of these you'll be aware of, things like chikungunya, dengue, yellow fever, malaria, but also from ticks, things like Lyme disease or tick-borne encephalitis, which is making a bit of a resurgence. And from our point of view, and probably quite a lot of people here, being in government, policy has an impact on how this might, what might be affected in vector-borne disease. So wilding and rewilding has the ability to change habitats and host diversity and abundance and cause microclimatic changes. This is something that we're aware of, and we want to be able to work with other aspects of government to promote, but also to be aware of the potential hazards that come with these from a vector-borne disease perspective. And also things that I've worked more closely on, sustainable farming schemes. So this is, again, working to increase biodiversity, but potentially leading to increases in tick-borne diseases especially. And this is something we're working on at the moment to try and understand more of so that we can all meet our goals together. So ticks, one of the things that everyone's here for. There are 20 species of tick in the UK. Most of them are hard-body ticks. This is similar to the ticks that most people have found on their pets or their themselves. And most of these are not a concern to members of the public. They're wildlife specialists generally. So this picture on the slide here that's going to change is a number of the ticks that we have in the UK. A lot of them associated with birds and other mammals, and will never typically be seen by people that aren't studying them. Whereas the one that most people are aware of is Zoonoses ricus. This is the deer or sheep tick. Most people have come across these. They have a wide number of hosts, and one of them, incidentally, is us. Very small. They go through a three-stage life cycle, starting at larvae, moving on to nymphs after a feed, and then a molt the next year, and then on to the adults. And they're very interesting organisms. So they have this Haller's organ, which they use to detect environmental stimuli. This can be heat, this can be CO2. And what they'll be doing is they'll be standing on a blade of grass or another piece of vegetation, and they will use this Haller's organ when they're questing and they're looking for a host to detect something coming by. And static electricity is actually what allows them to jump on and attach to their host. They are blood-feeding organisms, so this part at the top here is the hypostome. This is what they stick into you. It's like a bit like a hypodermic needle with barbs on it. It's very well designed, and allows them to stay on and not dislodge easily. And as I mentioned, we're a host that's an accidental host. We're not the host that they're looking for. So ticks have two main requirements to survival. They need at least 80% humidity. So they need a moist microclimate with high humidity to survive whilst they're off the host. This can be dense vegetation. This can be leaf litter, somewhere that just allows them to survive after they've fed until the next year. And they need available hosts for blood feeding. As I say, they only spend about 3 weeks of their year, 3 weeks of their life, on a host over their 3 years. So these are the two main things they need. There are a number of different things that affect their seasonality and their activity patterns. So we'll see that their temperature threshold varies across the UK. So we're based down in Salisbury, and the ticks are typically active after about 10, 11 degrees, but up in Aberdeenshire, where some people at JNCC are based, where I've worked in the past, they could be active at 2 or 3 degrees. So there's a variation throughout the year. What we also find is that they vary at different stages of their life. So the nymphs are often very active April to June, which we consider the tick season, whereas the adults are often more active again come August, September. So they live in a wide variety of landscapes. So you'll see them in grasslands, you can find them in parks, woodlands, anywhere that you typically find in general roe deer, you'll typically find ticks. So about 10% of ticks around the world are thought to be vectors. They're a significant impact on public health, and they carry a number of diseases. So the main one that most people in the UK think about is Lyme disease. This is caused by the Borrelia pathogen, but they also carry tick-borne encephalitis virus, which has been increasing in the UK, Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic virus, which is spread by a different species that we haven't had in the UK yet, but part of our work is to actually make sure that we are aware if they're coming in, and also some that are more associated with livestock, but there has been some movement into humans, such as looping eel virus or granulocytic anaplasmosis. So it's a very, very complex system, ticks and their pathogens. So this is a simplified diagram of ticks and how they interact with their hosts and the potential spread and movement of the Lyme disease pathogen. So with a host with multiple feeding stages, the complexity increases greatly. Host preference varies with life stage, with smaller larvae feeding on smaller animals, larger adults needing large deer, sheep, cows to complete their life cycle. Host competence to something like Borrelia changes with each pathogen and with each host. And co-infection in the tick also brings up different issues. That's just a small number of the things that we look at. And all of these influence public health. And that's really where we sit on this, is trying to understand how these different aspects affect public health. And just when you think it's nice and simple, it gets 1,000 times more complicated. With things such as climate habitat change, you get direct and indirect impacts on the ticks themselves and their hosts. And we also have different genospecies of Borrelia that cause Lyme disease. So Borrelia is found in different genospecies at different parts of the UK. So in Scotland and in Europe, we typically have one called Borrelia afzelii. Its reservoir host is small mammals, and this is the one that causes Lyme disease as most people think of it, where you get the arrhythmia migrans, the bullseye rash. But in the southwest of England, Borrelia guerinii and Valesiana dominate, and birds such as pheasants and other birds that spend a lot of time on the ground are the reservoirs here, and this typically causes neuroborreliosis, which can be more damaging, harder to pick up, and doesn't very often give the bullseye rash. So it's a very complicated disease to try and get to grips with and to work with the public on. So there's a number of hosts with different aspects that you can have here. So deer, they increase the number of ticks, but they seem to reduce Borrelia. If a tick feeds that has the pathogen within its body, feeds on a deer, that will actually clear the Borrelia. Pheasants, they don't increase the number of ticks terribly, but they increase the Borrelia. Small mammals will increase the density of ticks because they feed the young life stages and they carry tick-borne encephalitis virus. Squirrels, we're still trying to find out, but they may increase different aspects of the Borrelia as well. So it's a very complex system with Ixodes ricinus, the deer tick, and with Borrelia. So it's a lot of work that we're slowly scratching the surface of. But they're not the only ticks that we work on. We also work on the red sheep tick and the ornate cow tick. These are found in much smaller areas, but they do carry different different pathogens that we have to be aware of, and they are known for biting humans. And Hyaloma marginatum. So Hyaloma marginatum carries a number of pathogens such as Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever and rickettsia. These are more present in other parts of Europe, and we do periodically see them. They're often carried in on birds. And we want to make sure that if we are finding these coming in, that we know when they're coming in to prevent any human health issues in the future. So how we do this is through our surveillance. So we run 2 surveillance schemes. We run a passive surveillance scheme called the tick surveillance scheme. And there's a QR code there if anyone ever wants to send any ticks in to us. So it started in 2005, and it's a citizen science scheme. We get in hundreds, if not thousands, of ticks every year from concerned members of the public. We then identify these ticks, and I will say we do not test these ticks. This is not a system for testing if these ticks have Lyme disease. This is just a citizen science project to understand where people are picking up ticks. It's a very useful system for understanding if we're getting ticks on people that aren't usually bitten by these ticks, or we're getting any imported species that may be of concern, or picking up any real-time issues. So what we do with this is we can then contact people if they've been bitten by a species that may be of concern, or may be from a different country that has different tick-borne disease risks than we do. We contact vets, and we can really work with people as quickly as possible to mitigate health concerns. So our other aspect is when we do active surveillance. Now, active surveillance is very glamorous. We go outside to the woods and we drag a blanket behind us. It's very high tech. It's slightly more high tech than what you'll see with the mosquitoes later. And then we pick them up off a blanket and we get a disgusting little tube like this. So our active surveillance, one of our main things is the National Tick Pathogen Survey. So this is a network of tick surveillance sites across the UK. We have a couple in Scotland and a couple in Northern Ireland, as well as Wales and England, but mainly in England. We do annual surveying for questing ticks at national parks, national landscapes, and a few other sorts of areas. And we get from this risk metrics that we can use to provide guidance to these areas and for public concern and monitoring over long-term trends. So what we do with these risk metrics is we have DON, which is density of nymphs, that we ask our volunteers, our park wardens, we do some ourselves, to go out and drag their blanket for 10 meters. Every 10 meters, they turn it over, count the number of ticks on it. Do that 10 times, and we do this all over the UK, up to sometimes 40 or 50 sites a year. This gives us a standardized measure across the UK of the ticks and their abundance. The next one we have is NIP, which is the NIP infection prevalence. All the ticks that get collected on this project are brought in and they are surveyed for Borrelia. So we can get an idea across England and Wales, especially, of risk in the ticks of how much Borrelia, Lyme disease pathogen, they carry, and DIN, which is the density of infected nymphs. Because if you have a lot of ticks, but you have very low infection prevalence, the risk can be quite low. Or if you have very high infection prevalence, but there's very few ticks, the risk of picking up a tick is very low. But in some places, you can have the risk of infection be very high and the number of ticks being very high, which increases the risk. And these are areas that we want to work closer with to make sure that they are highlighting to the public there that there is a risk of Lyme disease. So this has run since 2014, and as you can see from this plot here, we have seen a bit of an increase in density of nymph infection prevalence. At the moment, it sits about 5 or 6%, and we monitor this. And if this increases, we do send out alerts. So we also do research here. So here is just a quick summary of some of the research projects we've conducted in the last few years. The first one was looking at grazing and non-grazed enclosures within the New Forests, and this was done over 3 years, finding that ticks were more common in the ungrazed areas. This is because it creates areas of high humidity and things like that. We also did some work in a local woodland called Bentley Woodland, where we intensively surveyed different compartments of this woodland, and then expanded this into a South Wilt study that looked at 37 sites over 5 years, just to get an idea of being able to extrapolate further. Finally, thing I'm going to quickly talk about is a project that I was actually brought in on. So this is called Optic. It's a large multi-institutional DEFRA UKHSA funded project focusing on understanding and mitigating the challenging burdens and impacts of tick-borne disease in UK farmlands. So this is a One Health project. I came in on the ecology and sort of human health point of view. So what we were doing, we were looking at 2 different landscapes of farms. So this was North Wales hill sheep farming and Southwest beef cattle farming, and trying to understand on these farms where ticks are, what the risk is to people and livestock, and how the surrounding area and the agri-environmental schemes were potentially impacting them. So they're very different landscapes. North Wales is a very large farm, a lot of rough grazing, very few deer, and a huge amount of animals. Southwest is small farms, mostly good green pasture, lots of wood, lots of deer. So quick idea of what Wales is like. This is good land in Wales. This is unimproved land. And then there's the hill. So the hill in Wales is very rough ground, but it's also got a lot of agri-environmental schemes on it. So these schemes are designed to increase biodiversity. We were hearing from farmers that they were seeing a lot more ticks up here. This does make sense. We want to, as I said, work to mitigate without diminishing what these agri-environmental schemes are there to do. Whereas down in the Southwest, we had to take a slightly different idea, which was working in these good pasture fields that still have ticks, and farmers that are finding ticks and tick-borne disease, or getting ticks and tick-borne disease themselves, where these ticks were coming from. So we designed a overly complicated area here, looking at how woodlands and moving away from the edge of fields impact. So this is 2 of my colleagues going out and surveying for me, and some of our slightly messy ecoturnal edges. Quick summary of what we found in Wales. Unsurprisingly, the rough ground on the hill has increased number of ticks, and as you get down through the less rough and then the improved ground, you get a lot less ticks. And in the Southwest, we typically find that woodlands and right beside the edges of fields where there's high humidity, you're closer to environments with hosts, have a lot of ticks, but very, very quickly, up to about 85%, you move 3 meters away, ticks drop off. A very quick look here. Interestingly, Wales, with a very limited number of deer, has very low Borrelia, a lot of anaplasma because it's in the sheep, whereas in the Southwest, you get a lot of Borrelia, a lot of chance of picking up Lyme disease. And now I'll pass over to my colleague, Anthony, who will be taking you through the mosquitoes.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm just going to run you through mosquito work that we do at UKHSA. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to mosquitoes and then go through our invasive mosquito work, our native mosquito work, and then a little bit of work that we do in UK overseas territories as well. Just to sort of highlight, mosquitoes like a wide range of habitats. So we find them in containers, we find them at lots of service stations, so a lot of our invasive work is done in those areas. They also can be found in flooded basements, and then gardens, and my personal favourite, which are wetlands. So in the UK, we have about 35 different species of mosquito. A couple of these are vectors for West Nile virus and Yasutu virus, which I'll go into a little bit more about later. But we also have had about 10 detections now of invasive mosquitoes, which are vectors for dengue and chikungunya. So that's Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti, which are these stripy ones, which you can see in the image there. Now, just to go through sort of how do we catch them, because I think some people might think we chase them around with a nice big net. But one of the main ways we go about it is to actually utilize their host-seeking behavior. So mosquitoes, when they're looking for a host, from about anything over about 10 meters, they'll start to try and pick up the CO2 that you may be giving off on your breath, or livestock or a bird even will give off. So about 10 meters, they'll find these odor plumes, and they'll start to follow back towards a host. When they get towards about 5 to 15 meters, they'll then start to use body odor, and then within about 5 meters, they can then detect you sort of using heat. And that's when they'll sort of go in close. So we have a couple of mosquito traps that are designed to mimic this. So believe it or not, if you're a mosquito, those will to them appear to be like a mammal of some description. The one on the right is probably our gold standard, this green mosquito magnet trap. And this uses propane gas. It combusts a little bit of that to produce CO2. And then as they get closer, they'll start to find a lure, which in that case we use octanol. We also use a lactic acid one. They just smell like really bad BO. And that will sort of draw them in closer. And then with the mosquito magnets, because they're combusting a little bit of propane, they'll actually generate heat as well. So that will really draw the mosquitoes in. I mean, there's a fan that just sits in there and sucks the mosquito up. At that point, they're absolutely screwed. That's when we collect them. But we do also catch them using larval dippers. So mosquitoes their larval habitats are in water. But this takes a little bit more skill to sort of find which water bodies they're likely to be in. They do have quite specific preferences, certain species. Some species would be in tree holes. So this wouldn't necessarily catch all the sort of array of mosquito species. So yeah, that's how we go about collecting them. So I'm just going to go through some of our invasive mosquito work. So the primary concern, I think, with the invasive mosquitoes is this Aedes albopictus, or the tiger mosquito, as it's more commonly known as. This is a highly invasive species, and you can see these are some maps which were produced in Europe by ECDC to show sort of 2010 and 2024. You can see in 2010, it's become established in Italy, parts of Spain, and very, very southern France. But by 2024, you can see how it's now spread across France. There's been detections of it in the Netherlands and as well as in the southeast of the UK, although it's not been detected, it's not established in the UK. And one of the reasons for this is, so Aedes albopictus itself doesn't have a particularly good flight range. It will only fly around 200 meters, but it can hitchhike in vehicles and cargo. So if you've got a lorry, for example, it stops somewhere in the middle of France, the mosquito flies in, they drive up to Calais, get on a ferry, they could come across, and then the next point where they're going to open their windows might be in the UK at a service station. So that's kind of those are our high risk areas. So airports, seaports, service stations, distribution centres, and used car importers as well. And Aedes albopictus will utilise a range of different habitats. So they're a tree hole mosquito, but they can utilise containers and rubbish, such as Coke cans, bottles, or used tyres. And believe that the change in their distribution is a result of climate change. So we have a couple of schemes to monitor this. So we have our invasive mosquito surveillance, which is an active surveillance scheme. And this involves these pots, which are set up, which are just a black pot with a little bit of water and a polystyrene block. And these are set up in high-risk areas such as service stations, airports, those kind of locations. We've got 110 sites across the country. And then we work with the local authority. So the local authority run a lot of these and send them into us. But if there is a detection, then we advise the local authority on what to do, and they'll appoint a vector control team who will go and actually control mosquitoes, and will also do enhanced surveillance around an area which we've had a detection as well. And so far, we have detected through this scheme, but we haven't had any establishment. So when we've run the traps after finding the eggs, we haven't been found any adults after that point. We also have a passive surveillance scheme, and this is it's now called Mosquito Watch. It used to be called the Mosquito Recording Scheme. It's just being rebranded this year. And this is primarily set up as a citizen science scheme for members of the public to report what they believe to be invasive mosquitoes. So far, we haven't had any native mosquitoes found in Mosquito Watch, but we've had over 400 reports submitted to us in 2025, and 108 of those, the person who'd taken the picture had then said that they believed it to be Aedes albopictus. And then just to give an idea, so the kind of things that we get are similar native species such as Chiloceta annulata. So a bit like Aedes albopictus, they have stripy legs. So a lot of people will see that and take a picture and send it in to us in that scheme. If you do find a mosquito and you want to submit it to us, there's a QR code, and I think there's a QR code at the end as well. As well as these invasive mosquitoes, though, we're also interested in our native mosquitoes. We have 35 different native mosquitoes in the UK, and some of these are vectors for disease. And we believe that their range is also changing as a result of climate change and changes to local land uses as well. So rewilding or creation of new urban wetlands or sustainable drainage systems may have an impact on mosquitoes, either positive or negative as well. So an example I use for certainly the native work is Culex modestus. So this is a mosquito species that was first detected in the 1940s, but was then absent in our records until 2010. And then in 2010, we found it again in North Kent. But then since that point, we've been conducting surveillance, conducting field work to see if we can find new areas. So it's become established in Cambridgeshire, Essex, and last year actually as far north as North Lincolnshire. And that was a particularly interesting case for us because we'd actually been running surveillance in that site since 2017. It kind of suggests that there is a change in its distribution in the UK. And we're particularly interested in Culex modestus, as in Europe identified as a primary vector for West Nile virus between the avian hosts and humans and equines. These are just a couple of examples of the sort of habitats that we would find modestus in. So for monitoring native mosquitoes, we have a couple of different schemes again. So the MRS scheme I mentioned earlier, Mosquito Watch, we get a lot of native mosquitoes reported through that scheme. But we also have our active surveillance scheme, which is a nationwide wetland mosquito program, and this has been running since 2010, and it's been run in over 70 nature reserves across the UK, and that's just a map there. You can kind of see the ones which we've been running throughout history and the ones that we've run in 2025. So we had 25 in 2025, which is about what we normally sample. Got about the same this year as well. And through this scheme, we've found 20 different mosquito species. The aims of the work are to detect new and novel species, to look at the distribution of our native species, and to look into the seasonality of the native species as well. So volunteers will run a mosquito trap every other week between June and October, and then send that into us where we'll do BID on that. And we do some field trips as well where we visit sites. But we are really reliant on the support of reserve wardens and volunteers. And to name a few, we have the local authorities, Natural England, RSPB, Wildlife Trusts and Wetland Wildfowl Trusts have all contributed a lot to this work. And then this is the sort of output that we get. So this is our kind of seasonality graph you can see below. And you can also see this map, which just shows the distribution of different mosquito species. In addition to that, we do quite a lot of active work for virus surveillance as well. So the current work we've been working on, we've got other work around this as well, is the VB radar project. Again, this is an active surveillance scheme where we'll actually go out and run traps and do larval dipping as well. And this is actually a collaboration between ourselves, the Animal Plant Health Agency, the Zoological Society of London, and the British Trust for Ornithology as well. So it's a One Health approach again. And the idea of this work is that we screen both birds and mosquitoes for UC2 and West Nile virus, with the field work taking place in 2023, 2024, and 2025, with plans to do similar work this year as well. So just to go a little bit into West Nile virus, so this is a mosquito-borne disease that we have now detected in the UK. We collected 2 positive pools in 2023, but enhanced surveillance since that, we haven't had any more detections. It's quite closely related to UC2 virus, though, where we've consistently had several hits in the mosquito population and bird populations since 2023 as well. But to give you a bit of background on West Nile virus, it's sustained in this primary transmission cycle between birds and mosquitoes. So we have species such as Culex pipiens and Anopheles macropenis, which can transmit it between mosquitoes and birds, but they don't bite humans or equines. So you need a bridge vector to infect those, which are dead-end hosts. So a mosquito like Culex modestus will bite a bird, and then it'll also bite a human or a horse. And in humans, about 80% of people will be asymptomatic. Just under 20% would have West Nile fever, which are kind of mild flu-like symptoms. And in very rare cases, you have this West Nile encephalitis, which can cause encephalitis and brain swelling. So it can be quite serious. And finally, I also wanted to just go into a case study of some of our native mosquito work as well. So this is a site that we have over in Gampston area in sort of Nottinghamshire. We had quite a lot of nuisance biting complaints around 2020, with 5,000 mosquitoes reported in a single trap night. To put that in perspective, in other locations, if we had a couple of about 1,000 mosquitoes, we'd think that's a huge mosquito biting problem. So lots of nuisance biting complaints from the local population. The local authority went in, they did some vector control on the site as well. But in 2025, they decided to convert what is currently this large grassland area into a new wetland. So as you can see, they've added these permanent water bodies across the site. So we went down last year as well to look into how the impact that was then having, and hopefully, just waiting for some. There's quite a few pictures in the next slide, and it seems to be taking its sweet time.
I think you're good. I think it'll be there.
Yeah. But yeah, to just put it, perspective, there's 5,000 mosquitoes. Annoying. Sorry about this.
Could you try unsharing and then resharing it?
There you go. Yeah. All right, we'll skip through. We'll go straight to the graph. So this is just a graph just showing the number of mosquitoes we're getting just in 2020, and they're not. If you can see on the axes, in 2020 we're getting 5,000 per trap night. In 2025, in the same trap, we're getting just 30 mosquitoes in a single trap night. So a huge reduction just by adding these new permanent water bodies and pools and scrapes. We also actually found a more diverse sort of mosquito species. You can see in 2020 we're getting really just the Aedes vexans species, which likes these flooded grassland areas, whereas in 2025 still the dominant species, but we're also getting different ones in there as well, Aedes caspius and Aedes cinereus, which is interesting just from the fact of, it's always good to have. I think it's always nice to have a more diverse wetland. But one of the reasons for this is kind of the perception would be, and one of the questions we got from the local people in the area was whether this was going to cause more mosquitoes problems because they thought adding more water bodies, actually adding water in there rather than it just being a temporarily flooded grassland. But what actually happened here was that because we have these permanent water bodies, that allowed the development of a predator population. So we had more water boatmen, damselflies, fish, and other invertebrates as well. And this kind of helps control the mosquitoes in a more natural way. But it also led to sort of because the way that mosquitoes are working is that they exploit these temporary pools. They'll lay their eggs in sort of maybe a dry hollow, which is liable to flooding. And then their eggs sometimes need multiple re-wetting cycles to actually hatch. But that kind of this process stops that. You've permanently got predators in the area, and if you do get any flooding, those predators will then spill over into those flooded areas and control the mosquito population. It won't remove it, but it has quite a positive effect. And then I finally just wanted to go into some of the work that we've done with UK overseas territories. So as part of our role here, we also provide technical support to predominantly the Caribbean nations as well as Gibraltar as well. The whole process of this is going out there and helping and providing traps to local vector control teams and providing training to allow them to continue to do the work. So you can see a couple of examples here, a couple of my colleagues here setting mosquito traps up, and the local team as well, they're working on ID, and we provide a bit of training there, and they've also got some very capable entomologists as well, like Camille, who's actually in the middle of that picture there, who works in Turks and Caicos Islands, and provides a lot of training for the local team. We also provide a lot of new equipment, so microscopes or new traps and mosquito control equipment. We'll try and provide it to them as well. And we also will provide post-hurricane support and any sort of, if we can, build any resilience for future risks as well. Okay. Thank you for listening. And
brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you. That was super interesting. So for anyone within JNCC, just to let you know, the link to the Slido is in the chat. So if you want to ask a question to Mark and Ant, you can go through there and you can post your questions anonymously. Or for anyone joining externally who can't access the chat, hopefully you should be able to access the Slido via this big QR code here. So I'm just going to get us going and ease us in first with a question from me. So this is one for both of you. I'd like to ask you, what's one big common misconception, both with ticks and mosquitoes, where you'd like to set the record straight?
Oh, okay.
Putting you on the spot.
That is
I think with mosquitoes, I think a lot of people see something that's flying and they assume that it is a mosquito. They might see a mosquito on a ball, but a lot of mosquito species don't necessarily bite people. And certainly it's only the female mosquitoes which will bite as well. So people often see a mosquito, they'll say, it's the mosquito that's bitten us. And it's actually something else as well. So I think understanding perhaps the diversity of mosquitoes and that, there's not just one species. They're not just all out to get us. In fact, quite often they aren't biting people, they're biting birds or reptiles as well, or mammals.
I would probably say that people have either an expectation that ticks are everywhere or that ticks are nowhere. Ticks are, as I've tried to sort of say, very sort of heterogeneous in their abundance. They are typically found where there are hosts, where there is high humidity. So even in, a square kilometre, they're not going to be ubiquitous in that area. And to sort of, if I can ever get, the idea of where ticks are typically found, or to keep an eye on, check yourself for ticks.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll now move on to the questions we've had coming in through the Slido. So we've got a few. The first one, I believe, is for Mark. So it reads, you mentioned that pheasants may increase Borrelia. Does this mean that pheasant releases could represent a potential human health risk?
So what I will lead anyone there to is there was a paper that came out last year from a PhD called Emil. I can't remember Emil's second name. It was through the University of Exeter, and it was looking at a large study where he worked with about a dozen to 20 different estates down in Devon and Cornwall, looking at pheasant releases, and so surveying in areas of pheasant releases and 2 kilometers away, I think, or a kilometer away from pheasant releases, found, as a cliff notes of this, found that it didn't increase the number of ticks, but it did 2.5 times increase the prevalence of Borrelia within the ticks. So, yes, we have found that pheasant release does increase Borrelia. It's always very hard to add that straight to risk of picking up Lyme disease, just because, as I tried to say, just because there is higher Borrelia doesn't mean that it automatically goes straight to number of cases. So there is increased Borrelia, but it doesn't necessarily mean, but I don't say it doesn't, that there is a chance that could increase could increase public health risk.
Brilliant, thank you. That was quite a tricky question, but that was a great way of framing it. Another one for Mark. So we've had a question that asks, what aspects of agri-environment schemes give the highest risk of tick increases?
From our work, any areas that increase ground vegetation seem to. So aspects such as removing animals over winter, to sort of allowing sort of this increase of ground vegetation that's then dropped when they're brought back on in the summer. This has a tendency to potentially increase. It creates a almost constant environment that's good for ticks. Potential things like increasing woodland coverage creates a large area for hosts in areas where there's roe deer. But again, this is why I say we want to find out ways to mitigate work. So down in the southwest, finding that 3 meters away from the edge where there's a woodland, that the ticks drop off dramatically, we can come up with recommendations to farmers to maybe put up an electric fence at 3 meters or 5 meters, mow that area once. It then allows for the woodland to still be there, but also to reduce the risk. So it's wanted to make sure that everyone can push. We want the biodiversity goals to be pushed forward. We're mainly ecologists here, but being aware that there are potential risks and unintended consequences of things like agri-environmental schemes, rewilding schemes. And this is why we're working with Animal Plant and Health Agency, Forestry Commission, a lot of other places to try and understand what these risks are and how we can mitigate them.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think this is a question probably for both of you. So someone has asked, it seems as though most of your work is focused in England. Are there other organisations conducting this sort of monitoring elsewhere in the UK?
Yes.
I'll let you go.
Yeah. So we're UK Health Security Agency, but we were Public Health England. So our jurisdiction is within England. There are projects going on in Scotland. There's some mosquito in Scotland work, which is with the University of Glasgow. And we do run a little bit of work as well in Wales. And I know Northern Ireland are also doing their own thing. I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah, that's about it. We do. So we will take the tick recording scheme. We will take ticks from all over the UK. And we often get a lot in, understandably, from Scotland. Yeah, as Anthony said, there's our remit at UK Health Security Agency for this work is England, but we do try and support the foreign nations with work and providing advice, and would be very open if further funding came available to provide more work and set up teams up there.
Wonderful, thank you. So moving on to a different question. Someone has asked, do you have any thoughts or advice on communicating the cost benefits of nature-based solutions, given in some situations they may increase the prevalence of vectors? That was a bit of a mouthful. Did you get that?
I'll let you go on that one.
Yeah, yes. Can you just repeat that again? Sorry, Chloe.
Yeah, sorry. So they've asked, do you have any thoughts or advice on communicating the cost benefits of nature-based solutions? And they're framing this as, given that in some situations, they may increase the prevalence of vectors.
Yeah. So some of it is kind of actually demonstrating. So, for example, the example I was trying to give with Gamston, where we actually saw a reduction in vectors, but public information, I think, is a huge thing that we need to do around that. So leaflets and engaging with members of the public as well, even in this sort of forum as well, where we're presenting work, is kind of the best way that we can do that. And actually, the work that we do in these areas, actually going and looking at a site before an intervention and after an intervention, and building up that body of research to demonstrate that rewilding work in a certain area isn't necessarily going to increase vectors, or it might increase vectors, but it might increase your predator population, and to sort of generally improve biodiversity and actually show the positive gains that are in those sort of initiatives. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mark.
No, I think that pretty much sums up what I would be adding there. Yeah.
Brilliant. So we've got two more questions, and I think they link in quite nicely together. So firstly, someone has asked, are there any recommendations from either project, so ticks or mosquitoes, on how to reduce tick and mosquito numbers to reduce the public health impact? And we have another question asking, when you're out in the field yourselves, how do you deal with the risk of bites from these beasties?
One of the things I'd say with mosquitoes, I think one of the best way, particularly for ones which we're more concerned about, such as sort of urban vectors, such as Aedes albopictus, should it ever establish, for example, is to actually ensure that you don't leave open containers, and to try and keep those covered, to not leave rubbish, things like bottles, things that mosquitoes can utilize. They can, even a very small amount of water in something like that, they can go through their whole life cycle in. So yeah, ensuring you don't leave uncovered containers, ensuring you don't leave waste can really help to control mosquito populations, particularly in urban areas. In terms of personal protection as well, when we're out and about, I'll leave you for tick.
Yeah, I guess we probably ticks, in the same way that I would advise anyone going out, tucking your trousers into your socks and wearing long trousers is a very good way to try and reduce tick exposure. Long sleeves if you've got it as well. And just when you get back, check. You may occasionally get a tick, just make sure you take it off as quickly. And if you feel unwell after having a tick bite, go to a doctor and let them know that you've had a tick bite. That's best advice for that. They would be the same advice I would give anyone, or we'd get in the team here. Reducing tick numbers is, I think, probably more difficult in some ways than mosquitoes. Once ticks are established in a location, it's very, I'd probably say impossible to get rid of them. One of the easiest things maybe is to try and prevent establishment. That can be from things like reducing deer numbers, especially roe deer. Roe deer are very highly associated with increased deer increased tick abundance because they are the primary host for adult female ticks. They're what they feed on and what the male and females will meet on and mate on. So we do see a very high increase of ticks in areas that roe deer move into. So trying to just keep deer away or reduce deer numbers does a lot. And in certain areas, whether that's, you know, in the Western Isles, there's been some work shown by an old colleague, Johnny, who worked out there doing his PhD at Glasgow Uni, and finding things like cutting the grass in those areas that decreases the decreases the survival likelihood of ticks. Makes a lot of difference. But once they're in an area, they're not. They've got things to feed on. They're surviving. They're not going to go anywhere. Just mitigation, really.
Brilliant. I've realised, so we actually have a hand up. James, do you want to just pop your microphone on and ask your question?
Thank you very much indeed. I was holding back until you'd done all of the other questions, Chloe, because I didn't want to jump ahead of those. Thank you both for a very interesting talk. I lead on the conventional migratory species in JNCC, and I was interested in what you were saying about climate change changing the likelihood of vectors and mosquitoes coming in. And I wondered if you could sort of touch a bit more on that in terms of some of the issues perhaps about multiple species and vectors, where you've got migratory species that we have coming from the Arctic, we have coming from the sub-Saharan Africa at different times of the year. I'm intrigued in terms of some of the things that we've been seeing about the spread of avian influenza. I know, of course, that's not tick and mosquito, but the whole One Health issue for migratory species is becoming a bigger issue for us to touch on. And I'd just like to see whether there's an angle here that we need to be thinking about from ticks and mosquitoes as well, please.
I mean, what I would say with the mosquitoes in particular is it's not necessarily just temperature related, but it's the changing in our seasons as well. So these sort of milder, wetter summers are maybe more suitable for certain mosquito species. It creates maybe more habitat. In terms of actually them coming across, I think we're just finding that the UK is just becoming more hospitable for a range of mosquitoes, particularly ones which we're finding more in sort of southern Europe. I think that's kind of the progression really upwards, and we're not just seeing it in the UK, but we're seeing it in other countries as well. So Culex pedestis, for example, is one that we've detected in the UK moving sort of more northerly. But it's also been detected for the first time in Sweden, for example. So I think we are just seeing a gradual move.
Yeah, I mean, sort of ticks, we are seeing the potential increase of especially Hyaloma marginatum, which is typically brought in on birds. The group's done some work before with the BTO and APHA trapping at Portland Bill to actually look at ticks being brought in on birds. I think it was mainly red starts. I think that you could defend them on. It might be the red starts. Can't remember exactly. Wasn't there? And they have found ticks on them. There is a potential from a climate change point of view that in the past these have been brought in. They may have dropped off, but they wouldn't have survived over winter, wouldn't have been able to go through their life cycle. The issue we're having now is that they may be able to establish. So Hyaloma marginatum can carry Congo-Crimean hemorrhagic fever, and it is as bad as it sounds. So this, from a climate change and especially migratory aspect, is something we are aware of, and we're sort of trying to get some work on with colleagues to try and monitor better than has maybe been able to do in the past.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A. We've not got any more hands up or anything in the Slido. So yeah, I'll end by saying a big thank you. That was super interesting. Although admittedly, I was quite disappointed to hear, Ant, that you're not in fact running after mosquitoes with giant nets in the field. But yeah, thank you so much. If anyone wants to get in contact with UKHSA about anything that was talked about today, the emails are up, but you can always drop us an email at the Science Talks address and we can pop you in contact. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much.